wind makes it move. Got it. You know what? I want to do one thing.
Good evening. My name is Lucia Van Berkum, and I'm a senior studying Spanish, and I'm from Grosse Pointe, Michigan. It's my pleasure to introduce to you this evening our speaker, Brian Wesbury. Brian Wesbury is Chief Economics at First Trust Advisors, LP, a former member of the Academic Advisory Council of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, and a regular attendee of the Economist Roundtable Luncheon at the Chicago Fed since 2007. He earned a BA in economics from the University of Montana and an MBA from Northwestern University's Kellogg Graduate School of Management. In 2012, he was named a fellow of the George W. Bush Presidential Center in Dallas, Texas, where he worked closely with its 4% Growth Project. A recipient of the University of Montana's Distinguished Alumni Award and former chief economist for the United States Congress's Joint Economic Committee, Mr. Wesbury has written for numerous publications and is a regular guest on Fox, Bloomberg, CNBC, and BNN Canada TV. He is the author of New Era of Wealth and It's Not as Bad as You Think. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Wesbury.
Thank you, Lucia. That was, oh my goodness, what happened here? Hold on 1 second. I don't know how that happened. I think we didn't tell Lucia not to lean on the keyboard. So all the tech blew up here. I have to redo this, so hold on. Yeah, it's what happens. Yeah, it didn't fall asleep. We just didn't say, don't lean on that. But anyway, all right. There we go. I think that should do it. All right, there we go. All right, perfect. Oops. Yeah, now it's going to work. All right, thank you, Lucia. Thank you very much. Good. It's great to be with you. It's been a dark couple of years, hasn't it? And I will tell you that walking onto this campus, it's been a long time. It's like walking into the light. I've taught a class here. I was here for a week one time. I've given a couple of lectures. I've given a couple of speeches over the past decade. But just walking, I mean, I was thinking about coming here and I can't wait. It's like, it truly is an institution structured to defend against feudalism. And it's awesome. So my title tonight is The Alternative to the Great Reset. And I will tell you that, actually I have to explain this a little bit. A lot of you know me from Hugh Hewitt. Some of you know me from my Monday Morning Outlook. Some of you work in the financial industry. You know me from First Trust. And I give about 200 speeches a year. Most of my audiences are financial advisors, and I always tell them how to get rich. I'm not going to do that tonight. Sorry. We're going to talk about the alternative to the Great Reset. And so I literally, my speeches normally, I don't even have to think. I don't have to take a note up. I don't have to do anything. But this one, I'm going to beg your forgiveness a little because I'm going to read my notes. So I think, I hope you think I worked on this well enough. I'm going to start with where everything starts. Ecclesiastes, not that particular book, but the Bible. King Solomon said, "There's nothing new under the sun." And I'll translate that, we all do, into human nature doesn't change, right? We do the same thing over and over again, either because we truly think it'll be different this time, or we have a reason to do it. And I'll tell you, I think politicians have a little bit of both of those reasons, all right? There's a reason they do what they do. And that's how they justify their behavior. I mean, that's what's new, the justification, all right? And so what we've seen lately is this new idea that we need a great reset. Now, I'll tell you, when I'm on Twitter all the time. I used to see Great Reset last year, late last year, early this year, and I thought it was a conspiracy theory. I really did. I didn't know it was a real book by a real person. All right, whether or not you think he's a real person or not, doesn't matter. All right, but he's well known in certain circles. And I didn't know that. And I finally got the book, and I kind of couldn't believe what I was reading. It was published in July of 2020. All right, we didn't know much about COVID. I mean, we knew some, but we didn't know much, not what we know today. And yet in July of 2020, Klaus Schwab lays out a full-blown argument using COVID-19 as the center of it to change the entire global economy and the role of the government in it. And I'll tell you, I kind of couldn't believe it when this is the way I'm going to describe it. I'm going to describe it in one sentence, and that is climate change creates respiratory viruses. Respiratory viruses create inequality. Inequality creates climate change. And around and around and around we go. And that's exactly what it says. And if you listen to politicians today, that's exactly what they say. Here's AOC. She said recently, "The climate crisis is a crisis born of injustice, and it is a crisis born of the pursuit of profit at any and all human and ecological cost, which means that we must recognize in legislation that the trampling of indigenous rights is a cause of climate change, that the trampling of racial justice is a cause of climate change." She's going around in circles. Boris Johnson at the G7 meetings, the Prime Minister of the UK, said that he told the G7 leaders, people, our people, I guess he meant, want us to be sure that we're beating the pandemic together, and also that we're building back better together, and building back greener, and building back fairer, and building back more equal, and a more gender neutral, and perhaps, this is Boris Johnson, a more feminine way. Now, maybe that's new, all right? What they want, and you all know this, is a Green New Deal. Free college, free childcare, single-payer healthcare system, federal control of the financial system, higher tax rates, a wealth tax, more control over the other education system. In other words, they want a change in the entire relationship between government and people. And they're using COVID as the center of this argument. And so the question is, what's the alternative? All right? Because we've heard this before. What do we do? And I'm going to answer that question and tell you that the alternative is freedom. All right? In fact, America and the Constitution, in spite of the attacks upon them, are the answer. They have always been the answer. The answer is freedom. Well, thank you. Thank you. And so then the question is, why is it always under attack? All right, and I'm going to tell you the way I answer a lot of these questions is I go back to stand on the shoulders of one of my heroes, and that's Ludwig von Mises. So in his book from 1932 titled Socialism, he, I think, uncovered the root of the argument. And so I went back and read this, and he started that book. This is at first, the first time I ever read the book, I'm like, what is he doing? And then I got to know him better. And he started the book by talking about having, all right? And he's always very nuanced and specific with words, but what having, I'm going to translate it into ownership, all right? And so what he said is there's only two ways to own things, and that is be the first one to get there and claim it, all right? Let's call it the American Indian, the Eskimo, whoever, the first people there and claim it, or you use violence to take it from somebody that already had it, all right? And so that's life, and over history, all this ownership by indigenous or natural people, if you will, ceased to exist, all right? It was either marauding gangs or feudal war powers or settlers, armies. We constantly fought back and forth and stole everything back and forth for thousands of years. All right? And so what's interesting, and Mises says this, is that all ownership, all of it, derives from occupation and violence. And so if you think about this, human beings are always at war. We want peace. So how do we get peace? And that's where law comes in. Because at some point, we attempt to create, we want to stop this feudalism, this warring, this violence, and create peace, so we bring in law. And I know there's historical attempts by man before, but one of the first ones I ever heard about was when Moses comes down from Mount Sinai, and God tells us, thou shalt not steal. All right, that was a law, all right? But then we went on. We created the Magna Carta, the UK treaties. Then we started then we wrote the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And those laws put into place a shield against future violence. And what's interesting about that to me, and this is what Mises talks about, he goes that these laws were written after ownership was already decided. Because we didn't do it on the first day man walked the face of the earth. It was after. And as a result, a lot of people feel that legal rights are nothing but time-honored illegality. All right? That because law didn't start at the very beginning of time, they'll say it's legalized injustice. And so in the United States today, even though the Constitution's 254 years old, many are still talking about indigenous rights. Many are still talking about racial justice and the earnings gap between men and women. And they base their argument on against the Constitution on the fact that slavery existed when it was written. That many places, men or women and blacks couldn't own property or vote. And we all agree, these things were wrong, period. All right? And so the question is, does that make a difference today? And I find this a fascinating question. Is it if it was really true that the distribution of wealth was wrong 50 or 200 or 400 years ago, does that make things unfair today? Because that's the question I think that's in front of us about the Great Reset. Do we really need to build back better, to pierce that law and change things? And the panic of 2008, all right, remember that? The financial crisis? A lot of people started talking about black swans. All right, what's a black swan? It's an event. Everybody thinks all swans are white. And then all of a sudden somebody sees a black one and it blows their mind. And so the financial panic of 2008, everybody said, well, this is a black swan event. It should have never happened. It's a tail event. It could, and house prices can't fall that much. Well, I'm going to tell you, my belief is that the biggest black swan event of world history is the invention of America. Because if you look back at the late 1800s, that's when the hockey stick of wealth increased. That's when living standard, most people believed that they wouldn't live any differently than their parents or their grandparents until that point in time. And so why was it? What is it about America that changed it? I'm going to tell you, it's the Constitution. And I know all of you learned this from Dr. Arnn in the Hillsdale lecture series on the Constitution, but the word right is only in the Constitution once. It's in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8. And what it does is it gives authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. And I love Abraham Lincoln's description of this. What he said was that this clause, this word right, put in that place in the Constitution, provided the fuel of interest, self-interest, to the fire of genius, invention, right? Because now you get to own it. Securing this natural right of ownership provided motivation and incentive. It created a new way of distributing resources. No longer were resources distributed by violence. Now they're distributed and redistributed by ingenuity and hard work. So let's just think about a couple of people. Sam Walton. He went from milking his family's cow, all right, to serving in World War II, to owning a five and dime, to becoming a billionaire and changing the retail industry. Oprah Winfrey changed daytime television and became a billionaire. Jeff Bezos started selling books and changed the retail industry all over again, and he's one of the richest people on the face of the earth. If you think about it in this way, America is built back better every single day. It's reimagined by these entrepreneurs every single day. And whatever the distribution of wealth was when the U.S. Constitution was written, or when Oprah Winfrey or Michael Jordan was born, it's not the distribution of wealth today. And so what happens is that it's always changing. And what changes it? Ideas. And I believe ideas are manna from heaven. You don't have them. They get put in your brain. That's my opinion. You can argue with me if you want. Some people think they came up with them on their own. I love those running backs that make it into the end zone and they go like this. I like that. If you have an idea, you ought to do that too, all right? Because you didn't come up with it. But the bottom line is that in America, you can always have an idea, and it's always possible to take that idea to fruition. Not always easy, but it's possible. And the real benefit of this is that we get a division of labor. And that's what's amazing about the Constitution and the right. No longer do you have to be self-sufficient in everything you do, because of ownership, strangers work hard to provide goods and services to other strangers, to you. They don't know you. They still work really hard to get you stuff. You work hard to get them stuff. And resources are allocated through a very complex and organic system. And what did Adam Smith call it? The invisible hand. The benefit of that, of the division of labor is amazing. And I got to tell you, I love this parable of economic growth that I read one time in Paul Zane Pilzer's book, Unlimited Wealth. So let me just share that with you, all right? Imagine we live on an island, all right? There's 10 of us. And every day we wake up and we catch 2 fish and we go to bed. You need 2 fish to live every day. That's subsistence living, right? You don't get the 2 fish, you're in trouble, all right? So you wake up, you work all day, catch 2 fish, eat them, go to bed. The GDP of the island is 20 fish a day. Now let's imagine that 2 of the people that live on the island invent a boat and a net. And they now take their iBoat and their iNet, and they go 500 yards offshore, they cast the net in, and guess what? They catch 20 fish. It's a miracle. They bring these 20 fish back in, and this is awesome. For me, I mean, I like to fly fish. I'll tell you a story about that in a minute. I don't like deep sea fishing, all right? I like fly fishing, all right? And so for me, this would be great because I want to be a farmer. So I'm going to grow corn. Somebody else is going to pick some fruit. Somebody else will offer to clean and cook the fish. Someone else will say, I'll be a boat mechanic. I'll fix the boat and the net. And so then what happens is you sit down for dinner and you don't have just 2 fish anymore. You have 2 fish, some corn, some fruit. Somebody's cooking the dinner for you. Somebody's repairing the boat. And what happens is we now have plenty. We have created wealth. It's perfect example of supply side economics. You invent something that raises productivity, you then have the ability to demand new supply. And so what happens is the island becomes wealthier. However, it doesn't have to end this way. How else can it end? Well, the other 8 people that don't have a boat, they're standing around on the beach, and it turns out that Bernie Sanders is one of those 8. And he starts giving speeches, and he starts telling all these people on the beach that this is not fair. We can only catch 2 fish a day. They catch 10. The income, it used to be equal 1-to-1. Now they're up by 5-to-1. This is not fair. So what we're going to do is we're going to raise a tax of 80% on anybody who uses a boat. So the boat comes back in. It's got 20 fish on it. Bernie and his crew threaten and cajole and, build a jail or whatever they do, and they take 16 fish, and they give 2 to all the other 8. Somehow Bernie ends up with 3. I don't know, but now no one is better off. Everybody still has 2 fish. And so what they did by taxation is that they stole the benefits of the new invention. And no one is better off. And it gets worse than that. Because over time, the boaters aren't going to be able to fix their net or their boat. And it's going to wither and die and break. And they're going to go back to catching 2 fish a day. And there are some of those 8 people that are going to get dependent on the boat that are going to forget how to fish. And then despair is going to set in. There's 2 ways the world can go all the time. And if you believe in inventions and growth and supply-side economics and freedom, you end up with more wealth. And so what is interesting about this is that this is what a lot of Americans have decided to do. I mean, Dr. Arm was just talking about it. It's sad, right? That's where a lot of our world is going. And politicians help them right along. Like Bernie, wealth is static. We have to divide the pie up differently. And I got to tell you, all this has been tried before. Solomon knows it. Everybody knows it. The ideas of Marx, all right, he's famous, but they weren't new. All right, nothing was new about that. And modern monetary theory, I'm sure you've heard of it, it's Keynesianism on steroids. Build Back Better is the New Deal, all right? Just like Marx and his followers, they're still pushing anti-capitalist mentality. And what's fascinating about it is when you fight it, just like Marx, you get met by ridicule, derision, slander, and insult, because they can't defend it in an economic argument. It's a political argument, not an economic argument. Now, America has survived these storms before, all right? And even though we have, and we've learned these lessons, we have Republicans and Democrats who let the government grow all the time. And that's just amazing to me. And so when we look at this, redistribution, I don't think the founders would recognize our country today. I don't. And let me explain what I mean by that by looking at a chart. Back in 1930, government spending was 2.5% of GDP. Now, I want to point out that this is non-defense government spending. All right, so I just took out the war, all right? World War II ruins all these charts, all right, because it was so big, all right? Today, government spending is 27% of GDP. Now, think about those numbers, 2.5% to 27%. That means over the last 90 years, government has grown 10 times faster than the economy. 10 times faster. And government is the one that tells us we're greedy. Government is the greediest institution on the face of the earth. Now, we have to take a step back just a minute, because not all government spending is wasteful. If we could probably argue about this all day long, but I'm just gonna say, defense, highways, police, fire, hydroelectric dams, all of them add to our productivity over time. And the way I think about this is that nobody is building billion-dollar paper mills in Somalia or Venezuela. It's not safe. It's stupid to invest that much money in those countries. We at least keep things safe. We have a court system. We have the rule of law. We have police. We have fire. Now, where I'm going to go next is this is where it gets interesting. We are supposed to be our brother's keepers, right? I believe that. And the question is why is it now the government's problem? Because churches and families have given it up. We've allowed government to shoulder more and more of the burden. From crisis to crisis, they grab more. From the New Deal to the Great Society to TARP and now COVID-19, government's increased its role. And one of the ways I look at this, and I'm not going to show you a chart of it, but it's the same thing as we're looking at here, is how much of our personal income is transfer payments from the government. And here's some stats, all right? In the 1930s, transfer payments were basically zero. By 1959, 6% of all personal income came from the government. It was all transfer payments. By 2012, it was up to 17.8%. And last year, it hit 21.6%. And so think about that. $2 out of every 10. In fact, if you want to be specific, $2.16 out of every $10 of income last year was transfer payments from the government. Now, you do the math, they didn't take 16 fish, but they took 4, which, by the way, is 25% of the gains in wealth that we've had. And so here's the way I want you to think about this. If we go back in time, and I'm going to use this chart and a little bit different numbers, but go back to 1935. This isn't perfectly accurate, but you'll get my point. Government was about 10% of GDP. And if you think about that, that means we had 10% of the economy, I'll call it 10 people, in the wagon. And that means there were only 90 left to pull the wagon. Then we go to the end of the Great Society. We had 17 people in the wagon, and we had 83 people pulling. And today, we have 27 in the wagon, and we have 73 pulling. Now, just to be fair, by the way, 13 of these people work for the government, so we should probably put them in the wagon too. But here's my point. And these numbers aren't perfectly accurate about transfer payments, et cetera, but I'm making a point. Which one of these wagons goes faster? The more people in the wagon, the fewer people pulling, the slower we grow. All right? If you really look at our economy, in the 1980s and 1990s, we grew over 3% per year in terms of real GDP. In the last 20 years, it's under 2%. 1.5% difference in growth rates over a generation is a massive amount of standard of living. And that's why people are feeling bad about the economy today. Now, I want to tell you that a lot of conservatives, that's what they talk about. They talk about how we're growing so slow, how hard it is to get ahead, how living standards are falling, how, Mitt Romney talked, I'm going to lose 47% of the vote. And people talk about the economy in terms of growth relative to the size. And I'm going to tell you, all of that is important. That's not unimportant. It is really important. But what we're missing when we talk about that is, as I think, the most important issue. And that is when people are in the wagon, when they're in the wagon, and they shouldn't be in the wagon, what happens to them? All right? God created man in his image. So man is supposed to be a creator, a producer. Becoming entitled to others' production, that's what happens when you're in the wagon, undermines self-worth and connection to community. People's souls die when they're in the wagon, and they shouldn't be there. So yeah, GDP is growing slower. We have fewer jobs. There's fewer wages. Housing isn't as affordable. Gas is more expensive. But souls are dying. And I think that's the most important piece of data we ought to look at. So, if you think about history, we could go back a long time. The UK had a gin problem. The Soviet Union had a vodka problem. We have an opioid problem. And all of it is because souls are dying. And so when we look at the next chart, I think you'll understand why I'm saying this. If you go back to before 1975, we had over 70% of people that affiliated with a church and a synagogue. And then we fell by the end of the panic of 2008. It was down to about 60%, and last year it was 47%. Now I'm not telling you everybody's a member of it. I think some people don't even know what being a member of a church is. All right. Maybe probably everybody in this room does. But the point I'm getting to is that the bigger government gets, the less faith in something else people have. And so when I look at this, government has become a savior, the ultimate higher power. And the saddest part of all of this is that we're supposed to be our brother's keeper. All right? And so the question I come up with is, all right, if we're supposed to be our brother's keeper, how many brothers and sisters are we supposed to keep? And what's the answer to that? How many people are hopeless, luckless, feckless, need our help? Absolutely need our help. Can't do it on their own. Is it 5 out of 100? Because if it's 5 out of 100, I actually think that's too high. But if it's 5 out of 100, that means we have 16 people in the wagon that shouldn't be there. And that's where we find ourselves today. And so when I look at our world, that's what worries me. It's not necessarily the slower growth. It's that underneath it, we're rotting, all right? And so just to make clear, because I'm sure there are people in this room that receive Social Security, Medicare, and that is part of this government spending. No doubt about it. And I would never begrudge anyone who's paid into those programs for being willing to take out of them. But here's going to be my point about them. And that is when Social Security and Medicare exist, when programs like that exist, financial planning, the family, the church, decisions about life are all changed. People save less than they would have otherwise. They don't worry about dealing with long-term health care problems because Medicare exists. And so over time, the problems created by these small decisions each and every day, each and every year, by millions and millions of people, they compound. And as we've learned, the road to serfdom is paved with good intentions. Those programs have good intentions, but the errors that they introduce into our economy compound over time. And we are living with some of those compounded problems today. And I will tell you that that's one of the problems. The other one is that if you go back to the Great Society, we have spent $25 trillion, inflation-adjusted dollars today, trying to undo the wrongs of history. This would be welfare, food stamps, all of those things trying to redistribute income, and all we're left with is the 5th or 6th generation of welfare recipients in inner cities with bad schools and a lousy place to live. And so we're not doing a great job of taking care of our brothers and sisters. And yet what we have is a system that has grown and grown and grown. And so in spite of all of this, in spite of the evidence that all these problems have failed, they're still pushing the Great Reset agenda. And I'm going to tell you that, Larry Arnn used the phrase tonight, we've done unprecedented things. We shut down the economy. We shut down schools. We shut down churches. We printed $4 trillion. We spent $5 trillion. It has been an amazing 19 months, 20 months. And I'm going to tell you, this feels a lot like a return to feudalism, although I've never lived in feudalism, but it certainly feels like that. And so the question is government has become so big and intrusive that it can leverage its power into even more government power. And what I would argue is that if, like today, we've seen this with the airlines. If you don't do a vaccine mandate, we're not gonna give you government business. If you don't do a vaccine mandate, you can't get Medicare payments. We're telling that to hospitals. And that's feudalism. And I'm gonna tell you to me, as an economist, it's interesting to me how quickly these things are affecting the economy. And I think that's actually a good sign, because it's not revolt all the time, although we saw it with American Airlines the other day, but because technology has never moved this fast, and by the way, it'll never move this slow again either, things are happening very quickly. And locking down the economy, I think, will go down as one of the biggest policy mistakes of all time. A market-based economy only works when information flows. It takes billions of pieces of information, millions of people to get you a tomato in the store, all right? Think about that. You have to build the trucks. Somebody has to make the lights, turn on the power to get the light in the store. The farmers have to grow, all of the millions and billions of things. And so when you break that information chain, when the economy is locked down, it's mayhem. Ships are backed up at ports, empty shelves, higher prices, and delays in service. You can't turn off the economy like a light switch and turn it back on. And because government can only handle about a dozen pieces of information at a time, the more the government tries to fix this, the more mayhem it creates. And so what I'm going to tell you is that what's happening to the economy right now, I mean, we all know this. It isn't a mystery. It isn't a mystery. Since February 2020, and this I find fascinating, retail sales are up 20%. That's pre-pandemic. So I'm not talking about from the bottom in April after we shut down. February 2020, retail sales are up 20%. Now in normal times, with no pandemic, they'd be up about 7%. So how is it possible that retail sales are up 13% faster than normal, and yet we have 4 million fewer people working? And the answer is, we borrowed from our kids. We gave it to everybody to spend today. We printed more money. And by the way, one of the things that this does is it's like giving morphine to an accident victim. They don't know how badly they're hurt. And that's what we have done by paying people not to work, by giving people money and letting them spend, and retailers selling more goods than they've ever sold in their lives. It makes it feel like nothing's wrong, when in fact all we've done is build debt after debt after debt. And one of the things that David Goldman said today is look at how fast exports from China to the United States are up. Why do you think that is? We're charging all that on our kids' credit cards. And this is why we have problems at the ports. I get it fully that conservatives want to blame trucking regulations, but that's not the problem. We used to have 22 ships a day go through. Now we have 30. We can't handle it. And it's all because it's artificial demand. And this is all part of Build Back Better and the Great Reset. And I want to close this section with this. This is M2. Milton Friedman told me to watch M2. He didn't tell me to watch QE and the monetary base. He said, what is happening to the money supply in the banking system? And let me, this is year-over-year percent growth in M2. We peaked at 27%. We're now growing at about 13, which if you look back over history, is the fastest money growth we've seen since the 1970s. This is why we have inflation. It's not all because of supply chain problems. It's because we have printed way too much money and we are now addicted to it. And my belief is that this will continue into the years ahead. And so I want to kind of move to my conclusion. And I know that so far I've described the problems we have in the economy. But I think what we need to do is at least think about where we go from here. And the battle of wealth creation, the fisherman and the boat, versus the redistribution of that wealth, Bernie Sanders, it's been going on forever. It's the battle of all of humankind, all right? Rise and fall of nations, wealth and poverty, it's all of it has gone on forever. And one of the things that I hear people say about America is this: democracies only last 200 years. And it's not really perfectly true, but we get the point, right? We're getting close to the end. We're going to vote ourselves, like all the majority is going to vote the minority to pay. Like, you hear all these things. And I'll tell you that, okay, I get the point. I look back in history, I see it. But here's one thing to remember. There is only one U.S. Constitution. There is only one America. All right, there's no historical precedent. So don't tell me America only lasts 200 years. It's never been around before. So how can you tell me that? And so I have to tell you, I still believe in the Constitution. If I had to guess, I would trust it. It hasn't failed yet, and I don't think it will. I can't prove that, but in order for us to continue to, we have to fight off the Great Reset, because that's the road to serfdom. And right now I find it really interesting that two senators, Joe Manchin, Kyrsten Sinema, seem to be standing in the way. All right, back in the 1930s, there were two brothers, the Schechter brothers. I don't know if you know that history. They were they sold chickens, and the FDR regulatory environment came after them. They sued. They went all the way to the Supreme Court and won. They beat FDR. You want to know why FDR wanted to stack the court? It's because the Schechter brothers beat him in court. And so if two immigrant brothers can beat FDR, two senators can certainly stand up to this president. And so I hope it's true. I believe it's true. And I think that they will. The frustrating thing is that we've accepted bigger government. We don't seem to stop it. And I look at Ronald Reagan. I'll go back to this chart. Here's Reagan. Comes in 1980. Government spending was about, this is non-defense, 17% of GDP. By the end of Bill Clinton, other than, this is George Bush Sr., the anomaly, but for those years, government spending was able to fall as a share of GDP. That's the anomaly. For some reason, we can't do it. We have to do it. And I, when I look at this, and when I see faith in government grow and faith in God diminish, I wonder if we're going to be able to turn it around without a revival. I really do. And if in order to believe in free markets, you have to have faith. And faith, it's really faith in your fellow man, that they, like you, are made in the image of God, that he or she, whoever they are, will show up to work every day and do their part to provide goods and services that you desire, as you do the same. I've said this twice now. Unfortunately, a great many of our fellow citizens don't understand or believe this. And so we have a lot of work to do. And if we look back, one of the things that really bothers me the most about this is masking up. I think it dehumanizes us. I think when you see children forced to play outside with a mask on, when you get served by someone who you can't see smile, we start thinking of our fellow travelers not as humans, not as fellow human beings, but as bundles of germs that will infect us. And as a result, I am really happy to be here where that's not thought about. And, I will, give Larry Arnn credit. And so let me just I'm going to close with 2 points. And actually, it's with that right there. I know what the alternative is. You know what the alternative is. All right? And I hear conservatives all the time. I've said they're fighting opioids, they're fighting crime, they're fighting trucking regulations, they're fighting diversity and inclusion rules, and all of those are worthy battles. But they're not the main battle. Because if we don't shrink the size of government, changing any of those things won't change our future path. We have to, somehow. And I think one of the keys to that is getting more faith. And we need our children, our journalists, our politicians to talk about this stuff out loud. We need to encourage them. And so we all know it's freedom and free markets. That's what gets us there. And I'm going to tell you that's what Hillsdale stands for. So in reality, the alternative to the Great Reset is more Hillsdales. It really is. I'm actually going to close up on, I hope that Hillsdale hears that. Matt, I know you're here. I'm going to close on this, and that is, I've kind of sounded a little dour tonight. I think the battle is, I'm sure you're getting used to that over the last few days, but the battle's real. But Dr. Arnn said something tonight that hit me, like right between the eyes. We're a happy place. And it made me think about this story, and I want to share it with you. Because it's about trials and tribulations. And I'm a fly fisherman, all right? I love to fly fish. I told you that I don't like deep sea fishing. And I fly fished in a lot of places around the world. Anyway, I fly fished in Patagonia. So I flew all the way to Santiago, which, by the way, is a forever flight. And then I flew 2 hours south of there to a town called Cahuque. And then we took another hour and a half truck ride to the lodge. And so we are in the middle of nowhere, Chile, okay? And I don't know how many of you fly fished in the United States or, kind of the rivers of the Western world, if you will. But the way you do it is you drive your truck with a trailer up and you put the boat in, and then you park the truck, and then somebody comes and grabs the truck and they move it 8-10 miles down the river, and you float down the river, you pull your truck around, and you take your boat out and you're gone. Well, in Chile, there's only sheep around to drive your car, all right? There's nobody there to move your car from one place to another. And so what they do, and all these rivers that you fly fish in are pretty shallow, and so what they do is they have a little jet engine on the back of a rubber drift boat. And so it has a draw of about 6 inches, and you put in the river and you go up river, and then you float back down. So one of these days we go up a river into a little lake, cross the lake, the river feeds into the lake on the other side. We go up that river, we get to a really big lake, cross that one, go up that river into a third lake, and that's where we start. All right, so it takes all morning to get up there. Then you put, turn off the engine and start floating and start fishing. And so the fishing's awesome, and the lake and the river. And then we get to this big lake. All right, and we have to go kind of kitty corner, and I'm going to call it 2 kilometers across this thing. Now, just as a quick aside, the water is like 36 degrees. So if you go in this water, you don't last long. All right. In fact, the founder of North Face died in the lake I'm talking about 2 weeks later. But anyway, so we're going across this lake at a kitty corner, and the wind is howling. I mean, we're in the mountains. It's 45-mile-an-hour winds. It's unbelievable. And there's 3 people in this rubber raft, and we aren't going anywhere. Because the waves are, the engine's coming out of the water, the guide is in the back, like fighting like crazy, and finally he asked the guy in the middle of the boat, I'm in the front, and by the way, none of us have life jackets on, all right? Now, partly because it doesn't matter, all right? You're gonna die anyway, all right? But I'm in the front of the boat, and he asked the guy in the middle of the boat to come back. And I'm like, what's going on? And you can't hear anything. And I finally figured it out. They needed more weight in the back to keep the engine in the water so we could actually make it somewhere. All right? And so I'm like holding on for dear life on the front. The wind is picking us up. And I finally go, we're not moving very fast. And I'm like, do you want me to come to the back? He's like, no, you're ballast. Like, the thing will blow over if you come back here. Stop. And I'm like, what? And then I put my life jacket on, all right? And I got to tell you, this guide that was in the back. He'd been in Chile for 23 years. All right, he's from Wyoming. I have no idea what the warrant is all about, but he's back there. He and the other guy, and I'm like convinced we're gonna die. And then like about halfway through, this guy yells. He's like over the wind and everything, Brian, and I'm like, what? And he goes, what's the difference between an ordeal and an adventure? And I'm like, you live? I don't know. Like, is this a joke? Like, he goes, the difference between an ordeal and an adventure is attitude. And I'm going to tell you, that's what we have to have, is a good attitude. Yeah, thank you. And I'm going to close. I've talked way too long, but let me just begin. Like, go back to the beginning, and it's Mises. We can't go back to the beginning of life and decide that that's how resources. It doesn't matter. Flip the coin. Pick any day in history. It wouldn't be fair. Nothing's fair, ever. All right, that's except for the law. And that's because once you put the law in place, we all operate under the same rules. And so trying to go back and break the law, to break down the barrier of the law so that you can change the distribution of resources, is literally going back to the same thing, the same place we were before the law. Getting rid of the law takes us back to violence. And that's the problem with it. And I don't know how you ever make a big argument on it. It's not a bumper sticker. You can't win a presidency based on that. You don't win a Senate race based on that. But that's the underlying philosophy. That's the underlying thing that made America great. And that's what we have to defend. And that's what I wanted to share tonight, what's underneath what we're defending. Not trucking regulations, but the law. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wesbury. We now have time for Q&A. If you have a question, please make your way down to one of the microphones. Student questions will be given preference.
Hey, Brian, we've been depressed the last 3 days.
Yeah.
This didn't help. So I want you to go back to your 200 speeches a year.
Yep.
Tell us, how can we navigate financially the next 12 to 18 months, in your opinion?
Yep, thank you for that question, and this is the one I do all the time. But I'm gonna keep the answer short and just tell you that we've done unprecedented things. I love that Dr. Arnn used that word tonight. I have fun with that word because we're all a little lazy with words. Unprecedented means it's been a long time. Like, no, it means never. Never have we done these things. So the only way to forecast in this kind of environment, in my opinion, is to get so what I do is I divide the world up into two parts. The next 12 months, and then after that. So for right now, after that is all this stuff I'm talking about. What are we gonna do about the debt? What are we gonna do? Are we gonna get the $3.5 trillion, spending bill? Our tax rate's going to change, and we'll find that out at some point in time. But what about the next 12 months? Well, we still have money we haven't spent on our kids' credit cards. I don't want to, but we're going to still spend it. We're still printing. We've printed $4 trillion, 38% more money, and that money's pouring into the economy. And so what I tell investors is, when there's a flood, everything in your house floats, but your weight set. And that's investing today. Everything's floating. Earnings are going to be up. We're going to continue to add millions of jobs over the next, 12 months. Retail sales are going to continue to grow faster than historical norms. We will slowly but surely fix supply chains. Profits, not at everybody. We just saw, Peloton had a big, COVID burst in earnings, but now they're coming back to reality. So will Brunswick. They make boats and pool. Everybody bought 2 pool tables. Right? So don't buy the pool table maker, But inflation's here. Gold, I think, don't just buy gold. Don't just buy silver. Buy a basket of commodities, because I think all of them will tend to rise. Oil companies are cheap. Manufacturing companies are cheap. Materials companies are cheap. I think commodities. I think real estate. I think real estate is at a permanently higher price because of 38% new money growth. We're not going to take the money out of the economy. So that all I mean by that is that we won't go up like we did last year, but we will go up more slowly from this level in the future. And so for the next 12 months, I kind of close my eyes and stay long, because when the Fed is this easy and they're not going to raise rates, stay long. So that would be my advice.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. It was
Thank
very
you.
enjoyable. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. How do we use the understanding of public choice economics, that politicians are doing what's rational for themselves, and what's rational is often keeping bureaucracy in place, increasing spending for their constituents. Like, how do we, practically, how do we move towards less government? I mean,
Yeah. Great question. It is the question. Is there, my speech was the alternative to the Great Reset, and I didn't give you one, except for we need a smaller government, all right? We need more faith, and I think, and so the practical thing, we all know the penny plan, right? If we just cut spending a penny every year, I've always believed, I always used to make the argument that Republicans should say we're gonna freeze spending. And that's just fight them off. Because when they come and say, oh, it was supposed to go up 4%, now you're going to keep it down here, you're cutting spending by 4%. No, we're freezing. We're freezing. And if we froze spending, believe it or not, revenues would catch up with spending. I'm not talking about this COVID bubble right here, but if we went back here, if we froze spending, we'd have a balanced budget in about 7 years with no tax hikes. But they won't ever do that. I worked for Connie Mack. I was the chief economist of the Joint Economic Committee. Lucia said it. But, I learned it there. You try to cut the size of government and cut taxes, here's what you're doing. Taken from the poor, given to the rich. It's their bumper sticker. It's easy as pie. How do you beat that? And I get, Ronald Reagan, David Goldman talked about him today. He was a miracle. He was able to talk as I mean, by the way, it's I love Donald Trump. I love his policies. I wish he talked like a grandfather. Like somewhere deep down, his kids love him. How is it because of him? Because if it is, I want to see it. If he behaved like that, he would have won 48 states. That's my opinion. Ronald Reagan could do that. And so he was able to at least get us there. But I showed you. I mean, this is all that was accomplished. You know, just as a quick aside, you didn't ask me about this, but there is a deep state, but I want to be careful how I define it, because I don't think it is a cabal of, like, there might be some people in the FBI, there might be some, what I believe the deep state is self-interested bureaucrats. Every once in a while, a group of them get together and pull some false flag operation or some crazy thing, but it's not, they're not related to George Washington's cousin who didn't get the House in 1778 and therefore started the deep, give me a brand and I'll, anyway, and I hid the glasses behind the brick in the Liberty Tower or what, that's not what it is. It's self-interested bureaucrats. That's all it is. We have to get rid of them. One of the ideas I heard the other day is you got to win the presidency, then you appoint the top of all these agencies, and they fire the entire second level. But I don't even know if that gets rid of it. Yeah. Trump tried to do it, right? He did. And he didn't, and it didn't happen. So I don't know. That's part of the reason why I ended up where I did, just kind of talking about how this happens. Because without understanding how it happens, we can't change it. I just don't know how we can really change it. Anyway, sorry.
We have time for one more question.
Yep.
I don't know where to start. I mean, since I stood up, I've got about 4 other points. You're so layered, it's great. One little technical thing. I'm a logistics guy.
Yep.
And if you drop the regulations, and this is up to the voters, if you got understood the regulations on the West Coast for the truckers, you could start yanking those boxes if you impacted them real fast. That's a practical thing.
Can I interrupt you there for a second? Because I've heard this. Were the regulations different in 2019?
I think they're more erroneously enforced now.
Well, I believe that.
Yeah.
But like 50% more or 10% more? I mean, the way I understand it, you still needed an engine that was less than 3 years old. You could still only drive 1 hour and 15 minutes every 18 hours, or whatever. Like, I'm making stuff up.
This goes to my second point, which you brought up. The truckers, the drivers, the owner-operators are so peed off and fed up with this. You can talk about your percentage, but you've got a time, 6 months ago, a year ago. Things are different, and they're just throwing in the towel.
Right.
Okay, so that's the technical point. The more romantic thing is you brought up the point about attitude. Adventure versus romanticism.
Ordeal versus adventure.
I think one of the big problems that we don't address and don't have the courage to address is the lack of work ethic. We have got too many people in our beautiful country that are addicted to the entitlements that they've been receiving.
Yep.
And unfortunately, it takes, as far as I'm concerned, a voting group to get rid of this. First of all, to educate yourself. Second of all, to vote for people that understand that and can start pulling it back. So you didn't really, maybe you want to answer that idea of how to improve work ethic.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to come back to the same answer I gave every single time, and that is shrink the size of government. If you take 16 fish from the people who invented the boat, you're not going to increase the work effort of the other 8. And so I mean, the government, look at this. You know what's a miracle? I'll close on this. look at how government has grown over 90 years as a share of GDP. And yet, we're wealthier today than we were in the 1990s, than we were in the 70s, than we were in the 50s, than we were, I mean, I know the 30s was the Depression, but you get my point. And so somehow, you know, we've been able to pull that wagon, even though it's getting fuller and fuller and fuller and fuller. And one of the key reasons is that of technology, right? We're using a steam shovel to dig ditches today, or a backhoe, and 150 years ago, we used a shovel, right? We were able to survive virtually because of technology in the last year, at least partly because of virtual stuff. And so I find it amazing that we've been able to grow in spite of all this. And today, you know, we're finally, I think for the first time since the stagflation of the 70s, you know, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, and Carter, the four horsemen of the apocalypse, all right? And for the first time since the 1970s, we're hitting the wall again with gasoline prices. And sometimes independent voters, that's all they need to see. And we wish 20% in the middle, half the time they determine elections. And it could be as simple as gas prices. Like, it drives me crazy because they don't think about political philosophy. They don't read Mises. They don't read anything, all right? Well, that's an exaggeration. But they just don't care about politics. But when they see the gas price go up, it's over for them. And so that's part of what happened in Virginia and New Jersey the other day, and I hope that's real. And anyway, so at some point you do pay a price, but we haven't paid a massive one yet. We're still growing. That's the key. We used to grow 4, then we used to grow 3, now we're growing 2. Eventually you grow 1. That's something about boiling a frog in hot water or something like that, but and that's what I worry about, is that we'll eventually get to that point where we're just boiled and we don't care. But anyway, so, and then just back on the trucks real quick. I can't fight you. You know about logistics and all of that stuff. I don't think the regulations are much different today than they were in 2019. I wouldn't argue that they're not being enforced. I wouldn't argue against the idea that truckers aren't teed off about all this. But I do believe that one of the key reasons we have all these ships backed up is we can't handle all the money. We borrowed $5 trillion. I mean, you can lose your job you can lose your job in November and spend a full year's paycheck in December on your credit cards. And that's what we did. We shut down the economy and spent 20% more. That's just a miracle. Like if we have 4 million fewer people working and 20% more in spending. That's just impossible to me, but it happened. And the thing I hate about it most, and Professor Wolfram is here in the front row, I tell Bob Stein all the time, I'm like, I hate being a Keynesian economist, because that's what we're doing these days. How many $100 billion is the Fed, government spending? How many $100 billion did the Fed print? Add them up, and then it gives us 2.5% GDP, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I hate this. Because that's not what grows economies. Entrepreneurship grows economies. Inventions grow economies, not the government. But we're in this place where the government's causing all these things to happen. Thank you very much. Thank you.